I think we're working. Oh, maybe I'll turn the volume down a little bit. Just getting myself organized. I actually have a new laptop. I got a new laptop for work, which I use for streaming, of course. And I'm hoping that that means that some of the issues I had where the stream would break in the past is not going to happen. So fingers crossed for that. It didn't mean I have to sort of get everything set up and migrated and everything. But anyway, it seems to be working. I think we're good. Please say hello if you're watching and let me know. My name is Kris. I am an American Australian. I live in Munich, Germany at the moment for the last 4 months. I work in IT and I am a knitter and sewer as well. And so if you've been watching my stream, I've been doing this sort of every week for the last few months. Oh, that is still very loud. Let me crank that down a little bit more. I finished a jumper. I finished a jumper called Lenatus, and if you go back and watch the previous streams, you can see all about that. And the previous streams, by the way, they're archived on Twitch for 2 weeks, and then they get moved over to YouTube, my YouTube channel, which of course I should have all the URLs ready to go. That was one thing I forgot. But anyway, we'll get it. This is the first one with the new machine. We'll get it sorted. And this is an interesting one because I'm not actually going to be knitting on this one. I'm going to be winding some skeins because the project has started after Lenatus. Is a jumper. I pulled out a jumper that has been sitting in a bag, and you guys won't believe this, for 7 years. I thought that at Orkney, it's called Orkney. I thought I had been working on this jumper a few years back. I actually checked my blog. 7 years was when I started this Fair Isle cardigan all over in Rowan. And I pulled it out recently for New Year's and discovered that it is, it is way small. Never going to fit me. It was never going to fit me. I don't know why I thought that it would fit me. So rather than persist on with it, I frogged it, which in knitting terms means I pulled it apart. I unraveled it. And so just to show you what that looked like. So when you unravel knitting wool, and you can do this. People, I shared it on Facebook and people didn't know you can do this. You can unravel. Sometimes in knitting, we do spend more time unpicking things than we spend time knitting them. So I unraveled this. It was 12 different balls of wool, different colors. And so when you unravel something, the wool ends up very crinkly. And so I knew very quickly that I was going to need to deal with the crinkliness of this before I could reuse the wool. And so I used my Swift, which we'll talk about in a moment. You can mount it horizontally if you have a Swift like this to become a skein winder. So this I did yesterday. And so this is a Swift, an umbrella Swift, which we'll talk about and I'll show you in more detail, mounted horizontally. And so when I unraveled the sweater, I wound it into bowls. And so what I did yesterday with the help of my husband is we took all those bits, we tied them into knots to make it a continuous strand, and I wound them into skeins using this skein holder. And then around those skeins, we tied multiple, you can see here examples of it. You can see the crinkliness, the sort of crimpiness of it. And so we tied little securely 3 or 4 or 5 places around it with some scrap wool to hold the skeins together. And in fact, you can see there's all 10. Oh, thanks for the follow there, DPDC. Really appreciate that. That's cool. Thanks a lot. So you can see here all the different skeins that I ended up with after I wound them together. And so once I had all those, and by the way, frogging this sweater gave me a massive allergy attack. I think it was because the wool had been sitting there obviously for 7 years, and I'm allergic to dust mites at the best of times. It gives me hay fever, so triggered a massive allergy attack. So when I did the scanning yesterday, I actually wore a mask because it was so bad the day before. So once I had them all skeined up, I actually gave them a bath. This is my bathtub. So I filled it with warm water, not hot, just sort of lukewarm, and a little bit of wool wash. And then I put all the skeins in it. And so I left them in there for probably a good hour. I mean, you want to leave it in for a while to sort of relax. And so I left them in there for a good long while to relax. And then... Oh, no worries, DPDC. I do this every Sunday, so hopefully I'm a bit late this week. Maybe next week we'll catch you at a better time. So have fun walking your dog. I'm sure I'll be here when you get back. So I gave him a good bath, And then when I took them out of the bath, I sort of squeezed them to get the water out. And then I hung them up to dry. And so these are all of them on a drying rack, which has now been moved to the craft room. So I sort of gave them, let me go back to my basic setup here. So I gave them a bit of a tug when after I squeezed the water out, I gave them just to sort of straighten up the kinks, because really that was the point. I wanted to get the dust mites off and I wanted to sort of straighten up get the kinkiness out of the wool. And I know some people, if you look it up online, some people will actually put weights on them when they're hanging to dry to sort of make them, go a bit more straight. I didn't bother with that. And so now I've got all these skeins, which are basically dry. Some of the thicker ones are still a little bit damp. So I'm starting with the ones that are thinner. So I've got one here. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to actually start winding these into balls. That was my plan for the day, is to actually wind some balls. And I figured the equipment here, everybody loves a Swift and a ball winder because they're pretty fun equipment. And if you don't have one and you're a knitter, if you're just going to knit from balls, it's fine. But eventually you're going to buy a skein. And, usually a skein will come and it'll be twisted up. And, it might be twisted around itself like that, and they look gorgeous in the shop when you buy them like that. You cannot knit from that, it will tangle up on you. So you really need to wind it into a ball, or as we call it, a cake. A center pole ball or a center pole cake is actually the easiest to knit from. But to do that, look, you can wind it around, you can just wind a ball. The problem with doing that is you will probably pull it too tightly, and we don't want to stretch the yarn at all. We don't want to, remove all that lovely elasticity. And so that's why a center pull ball, and specifically one of these ball winders here, this is, I can actually just take it off a second, hold it up to the camera a little better. This one I got, it's made by a brand called Royal. It's plastic. You can get fancy like wooden ones now if you want to go really, posh and artisanal. This was one I bought from my local yarn store back in Sydney. I've seen people build them out of Lego online. There's various ways. And the idea is when you crank it, you see the mechanism, that's going to wind a really nice cake, and you're going to see that. So to use one of these, you need a Swift, really, ideally. And so this is an umbrella Swift, which, as you can see, actually, the reason it's called an umbrella is because it folds up and down like an umbrella. And as you saw yesterday, this one I can actually mount horizontally to turn it into a skein winder. So that's what I used to wind the skeins, but now I'm going to use it to wind some balls. So let's get started. So the first thing I want to do, actually, before I start winding that, is I want to, because I didn't use all the balls of the original wool, I want to wind them together into one ball. And I want to start with the unused wool. Because the idea is when I start knitting from the center, I want to use the unused wool first and then use the stuff from the skein. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to wind from a ball. So you see here, I got a ball of wool. And actually, yeah, I'm just going to, what can I use? Just a second. Let me grab something special. So this was a Christmas gift from my mom many years ago. Let me hold it up there. So this is a special bowl. You see bowls of this sort of type for knitters. Sometimes they're made out of ceramics. This one happens to be made out of wool. And the idea is I can put a ball of wool in it. Where's the best place for you to see it? Over here. I can put a ball of wool in it and feed the thread through that sort of opening on the front like that. And that means I can pull and the ball will sort of roll. That works better in theory than in practice. But we're going to give that a try, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to wind this into a new cake. And so I start by winding through, the ball winder has this arm on it. And so I wind the loose thread through that. And then it's got a notch in the top here. And so I'm just putting the tail through that notch. And that is enough to get it started. And so I'm just going to start winding now. And let's see if if my little bowl will actually work. Not really, because it's going to be easier to just hold it in my hand or on the desk. And so I'm just going to start, actually that works easier. Keep it in the bowl and then use my hand for some tension. And so I'm now winding this, and you can see because of the motion of the way it's winding, you actually get this really nice sort of crisscross effect. It's not like when you wind a bowl yourself and you end up with sort of going around and around in one direction, and then you stop and you turn it and you're going around and around in the other direction. And then the ball falls on the floor. So you want to keep sort of a nice even tension on it. And the idea is because that center thing is so thick, when I pull this ball off the spindle, it's going to collapse a little bit, and that's going to help keep it not under so much tension. Because remember, as I said, we don't want to ruin all the lovely elasticity and stretch on our ball of wool. What if I just, actually, that works the best. I just hold it on my finger and let it spin. Yeah, that seems to be working fairly well. So I'm holding the wool on my finger, and I'm just... Oops, hang on, I got sort of a bit of a knot here. So I'm just undoing that. So normally you would see me knitting on here, but today I am winding. What about, I'm just trying to think of, how about if I can put it in the box so it doesn't roll around? Maybe that's a better idea. Just trying to get it so I can kind of, I need 3 hands basically. That's working better. So I've got the ball in sort of a box so it doesn't roll all over the place. And I'm using my hand to put a little tension on it. And now I'm winding. And you can wind pretty fast with this, really. Okay. So this one, this is the dark brown color. This wool, by the way, is Rowan felted tweed, which is a sort of 8-ply, light worsted, you might call it if in other countries, or a DK thickness. And it is mainly wool. It's got some alpaca and I think a little bit of rayon in it too. And I hope the balls don't give me an allergy attack. I assumed it was only the stuff I'd knitted with, but if I start sneezing, I did take a Zyrtec. I do see some bits of fluff coming off it. So I'm winding this cake, and then the Rowan. It's very expensive. It's actually really nice. Hey, Margaret. So it's actually really nice wool. So I don't want to waste it. So this is, you know, you can do this. You can actually buy sweaters from Goodwill or the Op Shop, and reclaim the wool that way as well. I know, you know, it's good for sustainability. I'm doing the sustainability challenge at work for the next month, so I'm gonna claim this as my contribution. Okay, so I've wound the ball, and so now I'm gonna go with the skein. So this, remember, is the skein I frogged and I washed it and I reclaimed it. So I'm gonna collapse my umbrella swift a little bit just so that I can get the skein over it. So I'm gonna put the skein over the umbrella swift, and then I'm gonna open it up a little bit more just to sort of hold it, not tight, but you know, hold it. Okay, so now I need to remove my ties that I put on it. So I'm just gonna tear those off. Okay, 1, 2, how many? I generally put I started putting 4, and then a few of the skeins looked like they, you know, needed a bit more. I didn't space them out really well, so a few of them I put more than, this one looks like I did 5 or 6. Goodness, 6. I guess because it was a skinnier skein, I was worried that it might get tangled up when I washed it, but it doesn't look like any of them did. Like, they all came through the washing process really well. Okay, so that is all the ends. And so to tie the skein, I did sort of a figure 8. So I went, if I do it on that side, you can see better. So I went around, and then I kind of poked it halfway through and fed the ends back through of the bit of wool, and then I tied it into a knot. So just to sort of really secure it. All right, so I'm going to start with, I'm going to find a loose end. So here's a loose end. I'm actually going to tie that onto, oh, hang on a second. Let me collapse this. I wanted to put it on the other direction because I want it to wind. I wanted to unwind from that way just because it fits better with the way I've got the ball winder for you. Let's make it a bit bigger again. Okay. Let's take our end. I'm going to tie that onto the, normally, as I said before, we don't like to have knots in knitting. Because I'm reclaiming this wool and I'd used it in a Fair Isle jumper with a lot of colors, which meant that sometimes a color was only used for a few rows, it's in pieces, and that's not ideal. And so there are things you can do. You could try felting it together. I'll give that a go. I've been told Rowan felted tweed doesn't felt very well, which seems odd. It's got enough wool and alpaca, but I don't know. They said it doesn't felt very well. So I'm assuming that I will just have to, I'll have lots of joins and ends to weave in when I actually do knit with this, but it's fine. I would rather reuse the wool and have a little bit of wastage due to that than waste the entire 12 balls. Okay, so I've tied that on, and so now I can go ahead and continue winding. And so you'll see that now the swift actually turns, and so I'm actually just winding straight off of the swift. People always get very entranced by this part. And you will see some knots go by. That's where we knotted the various bits together yesterday when we were skeins. But they go through just fine onto the ball. And this one was a very skinny. This is one of the smallest skeins that I did, so it will not take me very long at all. But yeah, if you want to do this and you don't have a swift, it's a pain because you've got to have someone you hold their arms out like this to hold the skein on it, or you use the back of a chair or something. And it's a real pain in the ass. So trust me, if you like buying wool on the skein, or you want to do this, invest in a swift and a ball winder. All right, so now what I'm going to do is make sure I don't lose that center pull bit. So I'm going to hold that. And I'm just going to slide it off the cone. And instantly you see that hole in the middle, it's going to kind of shrink, like I'm going to squeeze it and it kind of shrinks up. It's a very dark wool, you can't see it so well. And then the loose end on the outside, my cameras are switched. I keep forgetting which I'm looking at. This one. I'm just going to kind of tuck it under some of the wool just to keep it from coming unraveled. Because when I actually knit from this color, I'm going to start from the middle. I'm going to start from the bit there in the middle. Because that was the wool that hadn't been used yet. So it's not kinked up at all. And so and it doesn't have as many breaks as in it. So I'm going to start from the center. But I do have a nice, now, center pull ball of that wool. Let's set that aside and do another one. All right, what color do I have here? My camera's autofocus is not happy. Oh, which one? Which one? The little one or the big one? Oh, sorry about that. Is it when I'm holding things close, or is it this one? It might be because of the light. It's a very bright day today in Munich, and we have snow outside, so I've got light coming in the window. And so it is a bit backlit. This one here behind the swift, might just have to deal with it, unfortunately. All right, so I've got this one, which is sort of a cinnamony kind of a color. And so let me find the actual ball of that matches. That would be that one. And so again, I'm going to start with winding from the ball first. There we go. There's the end of the ball. So start by winding it through the little thread guide. That's just to make sure that the wool is always coming from a fixed position. I'm going to catch the end in that little slit at the top of the spindle. And then I am just going to start winding. Oh, it can't keep up when the umbrella is spinning. Yeah, I imagine that is. Yeah, I wondered about that. It might also be, my internet connection. Ooh, my CPU usage is only 10%. So getting a new laptop with more memory has definitely helped on the streaming in some respects. So that's a victory. All right. Okay, here we go. This ball is just a little bit tangled up. So I know some people, because even when you wind with one of these ball winders, your ball can still end up being a bit tight and the wool can be, stretched. And so one technique I've seen people do is to actually then once you wind a skein onto the initial cake, as we call it, is to then turn and wind from that cake. Wind a new one from that cake onto another one, because it'll come more evenly off the cake than it does off the Swift. Sometimes when it's coming off the Swift, it wants to like pull, because you're pulling it to get the action of turning the Swift at the same time. It can mean that you're putting the wool under a lot of tension and stretch. Oh, Will got a new one too. Yeah, well, this is my work machine, and I'd had my previous one for 3 years, so 2.5 years. And it only had 8 gig of RAM, this one is 16, which is much better. All right, here we go. But it did me, yeah, I didn't do the thing, like normally when you set up a new Mac, it gives you the option to just like copy everything from the old one. Because it's a work machine, they do some imaging and stuff on it first, so it didn't give me that option. So instead, I just used a hard drive to copy things over that I needed to. But things like my OBS, which is the platform I use from streaming, I reset up all the scenes and everything for that. So that's why they're slightly different. Trying out some different arrangements of cameras and different. I'm not using the iPhone today. Normally, I use my iPhone to film the action shots, but I'm using my normal webcam pointed at the Swift and ball winder, and I've got the laptop pointed at my face. So, there's lots of fuzz coming off this. I really hope it doesn't make me start sneezing again. Normally, I don't have a problem with wool. I have a problem with dust, and if the wool was sitting for 7 years, as I determined this week, it stands to reason it might have gotten a little dusty. I mean, I did have it in like a project bag, but clearly it didn't save it completely. The center, so the thread out of the center of the ball came loose, and so it keeps tangling up around the wool I'm winding. Let's try rewinding that. Okay. Come on. Every time I've done like a knitting demonstration or a booth, because sometimes like the Knitters Guild would have one at a craft fair or something, for some reason people are just entranced by the Swift and the ball winder. I guess because it's a fun gadget and it's very dynamic and spins and they're fun to use. One thing I would suggest, by the way, is if you do get one and you buy woolen skeins, the impetus is going to be for you to wind everything into a new center pull ball immediately. I would resist that impulse, unless you're ready to actually start the project, as I am. Your wool is actually better off in the skein, as I said, because being in a ball, even a center pull cake like this, it is going to be pulling on the wool to some extent, and so it is going to be stretching it slightly, and you just really don't want to stretch it at all if you can avoid it. So resist the impulse. And look, you see a lot of people who are like, oh, just bought 10 skeins, winding immediately. Like I think they're stupid, like to be opinionated about it. Like you shouldn't actually, or I've been to like various craft fairs where people will buy skeins and then immediately, because a lot of retailers will provide a skein and ball winder, and you'll see people winding like 10 different skeins all at once. It's like, what are you doing? Like you should only, like when I've done projects in the past that used lots of wool bought in skeins, I've actually only winded a couple balls worth at a time. Like, are you going to notice, is it going to make that much difference to your knitting? Probably not, but why not do it properly? Okay, so there's the cinnamon one. And so now ready to actually wind the hank. So the hank that I frogged and washed. Okay, before I put it on, where's the end? Can I find the end? I might just have to put it on and then find the end. All right, so putting it. And so both of these devices, the Swift and the ball winder, they clamp to the table that you're using, which is which is very useful. Hang on, come back, get back in there. Okay, so now I'm just gonna undo the little ties I put on the Swift to hold the skeined wool together. And if you recognize this color of the wool used to tie it, it's because it's leftover bits of Lanatus, the jumper that I've been finishing on here the last several weeks. Finally finished. I wore it on the last stream, so I didn't want to wear it again, but I blocked it, by the way. If you haven't seen it, it's on my Instagram. And oh, it looks so glorious now blocked, because the blocking, it just really makes the design. So by blocking, what I mean is I washed it, and there's my tail, and it's coming off the right way. Cool. So I washed it, and then I pinned it out to dry. And I actually did this on my bed because it was the biggest area I had to sort of pin it out. And so I put a towel, I washed it on the wool. I put it in a laundry bag and washed it in the washing machine on the wool cycle. And then I pulled it out, and so it's still damp. And I'm ready to start wetting this one. I'll wind slower. Maybe if I go slower, the autofocus won't. No, it's still going to freak out, isn't it? So then I pinned it. And one of the things I noticed about Lanatus when I wore it is it was very tight under the arms. Like, I think my row gauge for the yoke part was a bit tighter than the designer's, and I didn't really measure it, which I should have. And so blocking can really help with a multitude of fitting sins. So since it was damp, what I did is I then used pins to pin it out on a towel on the bed. And I really kind of stretched that area and pinned it into place in a stretched way. And then as it dries, it actually dries and it holds that shape. So that's all blocking means. Blocking doesn't have, like, people get very freaked out about blocking. I mean, you can get a bit fancier with like lace shawls and stuff where you might need some specialty equipment for doing blocking. But for a normal jumper, all it means is washing it, laying it out in the shape that you want. You don't have to pin it. Like, if it's just drying because it's a jumper that you have and you like the fit and it doesn't need any special treatment, just lay it flat to dry. You wouldn't hang it. The weight of wet wool will stretch it, so you always lay wool garments flat to dry. But if you do need to do something with the sizing, you can do that. And there's the end. All you have to do is, pin it into the shape you want. Or if it's actually too big, you can even, by blocking it and sort of patting it into the shape you like and leaving it like that, you can even to some extent address a garment that is too big. So, blocking. If you're unhappy with something off the needles, you will often be surprised how much it changes in the blocking. All right, there's the cinnamon color done. 2 down, 10 to go. All right, we'll do the sort of pinky berry color next. Where's the wool for that? There it is. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of fibers coming off this wool as I spin it. Okay. Yeah, so I blocked Lanatus, and it, like I said, it's really it really made it look a lot nice. It looked nice to begin with. It was a nice looking sweater, but it looks really nice now. And I also added a bit of length by sort of when I pinned it out, I sort of stretched it a little bit lengthwise as well, like to the waist, which made it into almost more of a tunic. And that worked really quite well too. Okay, this ball is actually winding from this, pulling out of the center. I'm just trying to figure out where the end of this ball is coming from. It's coming from the center, which is good. But But yeah, in a week of chaos, armed terrorist insurrections and whatnot, it felt nice to be in control of something. And I was able to block my jumper and feel in control. All right, let's start winding this ball. So I should probably tell you about the one I'm wearing. This is one you haven't seen before. This jumper that I'm wearing here, I've got a better picture of it here. I'll show you. So this is called the Eyelet Yoke Light. And so this is one I did about a year ago. It was actually at the start of 2020. And this was the start of my love affair with the short sleeve, 4-ply, top down yoked sweater. It's almost like a t-shirt. And so the wool that I use, so this is a wool called Hobby Twister. And Hobby, Hobbii, I believe, is I think a Danish company. They keep advertising to me here like crazy in Europe now. But I bought it from an Australian yarn store, from the Convent and Chapel wool store in Rylstone, New South Wales, some time ago. But it has a long color gradient on it, which is what I liked. And so I went to Ravelry to look for patterns that used a 4-ply and that really showed off a long color gradient. And I hit upon this short sleeve t-shirt. And so, as I said, you start at the top. It uses increases as you go down to the shoulders, just like I did on Lanadas. Then you divide for the sleeves. You'll notice on this one question I had when I did it, because I wanted the little sleeves to maintain the color gradient without, because if I had actually knitted the entire body, then the little sleeves, when I went back to pick up little bits on the sleeves, they would have matched the bit at the waistline, not the bit there. So what I did actually is when I got to that point where I divided for the armholes, I broke the yarn there. And so I used the color that then I started on the sleeves. And so I knitted the sleeves at that point. So that way the color on the sleeves matches the color gradient on the body. They end up with that green and not it ends up being quite a navy blue by the time you get to the waist. So I'm very happy with that. It was a very easy knit. The wool, well, it's not wool actually. It's I believe a cotton acrylic that I used, meaning it's really nice, for a warmer climate like Australia. And yeah, it really shows off the gradient on that wool very effectively. And yeah, it's what kicked off my love of this particular construction of sweater, which I've now done 3 of them. So the Virgil that I showed off a few weeks ago, which was the sort of Wonder Woman-esque one, the navy blue with the gold and the red design element, and then Lanadas, which is more of a traditional style Scandinavian knitting with 2-color ferrule around the top. So will I knit another style like this? They're very wearable. Like today, I'm wearing it with a long sleeve t-shirt underneath. This is a Uniqlo heat tech, so that gives you the warmth. But I've also worn this in the summer in Australia like this with just a singlet or even nothing underneath because it's cotton. I mean, because of the eyelets used, you can see through the eyelets. So, I don't like showing off my bra, so I usually wear something underneath. But the Ravelry page, if you want to make it, that is the Ravelry page for the pattern. And you see it looks just as effective in a solid color. Like in a solid color, you see the eyelets as kind of a design element. But it also looks great in color blocking or in a gradient yarn. I mean, I think the one thing I wish I had done on mine, that if I did another one, I would do, is you can see that first. So there's a row of eyelets around the collar, right? And then there's another row just below. They almost line up with the color changes. And so the pattern actually has you do them like at a set number of rows. But I kind of wish that I had actually, said stuff the pattern and just do do the eyelets on the rows where the color changes. I think that would look even cooler, but I didn't. All right, so I wound the skein much smaller for some reason. I have to really shrink the umbrella swift down. Okay. All right, let's tear off the ties. And that looks like my tail right there. Is that my tail? Oh no, I think that's actually the starting point. So yeah, the eyelet yoke light, very, very nice. I'm sure there are similar ones knitted in a thicker yarn, in an 8-ply. But again, if you're knitting something short-sleeved like that for layering, you know, you're going to get more wear out of it, I feel like, in a finer yarn. And the cool thing was about that gradient, like I was so excited by the color changes in the gradient. It was not as boring as knitting the body of Lenatus, which was all, you know, in a solid color. The actual gradient gave me some visual interest. Okay, so I'm ready to tie on the skein to the ball of wool. So I will undo these knots when I actually come to them in the knitting. I will either cut them out or I'll undo them because I don't want knots in my actual knitting. Oh, hang on. Let me get it wound through the right way, through the little thread guide. Okay, here we go. And now we're going off the swift. Look, these sort of plastic and metal swifts, they're not the best. Like this one, I think you know, one of the little metal hooks unpopped at one point. Oh yeah, it was the little ring that holds it around the top. I remember it came undone, and so we fixed it with some wire. Like they're not, look, they're all, you'll find this exact one and bolt winder in a million places on the internet because I think they're made in China and they just crank them out by the million. You know, they're fine. They're not super high quality. And so I've seen ones that look to be a bit more heavy duty. I mean, also with this ball winder, I can probably only wind around a 50 gram. I mean, obviously it depends on the thickness of the wool, but you know, if it were 100, you can do 100 gram. I have done 100 gram because sock wool is normally 100 gram skein. I've done sock wool in one ball on this, but to actually, like, if you're going to do a really big hank, and sometimes you can buy like 200 gram hanks of wool, you wouldn't be able to wind a 200 gram hank on this ball winder. So I'd probably buy, they make like heavier duty ball winders for doing really big skeins. And someone's just joined the stream. Hello, whoever's just joined. Okay, so there is, we've now wound three center pull cakes, as we call them in the knitting world. And so if I pull that off, so there we go. We have a nice center pull because you can see the yarn's coming out of the center, and I'm just going to squish it because said that spindle's so thick for a reason, because then when you take it off, it relaxes. And so it doesn't, the wool is not then stored under tension. All right, that's 3 colors down. What's the next color? The next color is this navy blue color. So for the person who just joined, this is actually, I've reclaimed a bunch of wool from a sweater that I knitted in 2013, 7 years ago. I didn't think it was that long ago, but it turns out it is. And so I unraveled the sweater. I'll just show the photos again. So I unraveled the sweater and wound it into skeins. So this is me using my Swift yesterday as a skein winder. And so when I unraveled it, I then wound it into loose skeins using that. Then I tied those skeins. And so you see it comes off quite crinkly because it's been knitted and sitting there for 7 years, you know. It's It reminded me, doesn't it look like, what's her name from Brave? It looks like, the Disney characters, Merida's hair, that red one specifically. But it comes off very kinky and curly. And so I tied it in a couple of places around the skein. And then I gave it a bath. There's actually so I used 12 different colors on this Fair Isle garment. And you can see some of them I used a lot more than others. Then I gave them a bath, in a lukewarm bath with some wool wash. I let them sit for a good hour to relax. To get the dust out, because like I said, when I frogged the sweater, it gave me a massive allergy attack. I get hay fever from dust mites, and that was not a good night. So I washed it to get the dust out, but also to let the kinks relax, because I'm going to reuse this. I'm going to knit I'm going to use the color chart from this pattern, but I'm not going to knit a cardigan. I'm going to do a sleeveless vest, I think. And then I hung them up to dry on a drying rack. And so now what I'm doing is, for each color, I am winding into a new cake. Whoops, wrong one. And I'm starting with the unused balls, because for each color, I didn't use the whole ball of wool. And so I'm starting with the unused ball, and I'm winding that first, because then when I start knitting from the center, I will start knitting from that wool first. So I'm winding that on. And then I'm winding on the skein of reclaimed wool. And because this was a Fair Isle, meaning, multicolored design with lots of different colors, there's a lot of breaks in it. So I'm going to have to deal with a lot of joining on new balls of wool. And yep, I feel like I'm going to sneeze. So clearly I did not, maybe the balls of wool also had some dust on them, not just the stuff in the sweater. So I've got the window open, and I've taken a Zyrtec, but we'll see. I won't do all 12 today. I'll tell you that, because I'm guessing it will probably send me into a vicious sneeze attack. Some people claim they have an allergy to animal fibers. I suspect in most cases it is just that the person thinks that it's itchy. I don't have a lot of sympathy for people who, look, just say you find it itchy, like whatever. That's fine. There's certain wool, we talked about how I found the Icelandic wool really super itchy. But don't blame it on an allergy. I'm sure there are certain people with hey, I am actually a person with very sensitive skin. I'm sure there are people for whom it is a bigger concern than others, but yeah, finding it itchy is one thing, but it's like people who want to eat low carb and then claim they're allergic to gluten. No, you're not. You just, if you don't like something, you're allowed to have a preference. Just don't claim it's an actual medical allergy. And you'll probably find that wool, said some wool is very itchy, other wool is not. A great deal of it depends on how it's processed and spun. Merino wool, the Australian merino sheep, is prized because it has a very long staple, which means, the length of each individual hair, basically. A longer staple, a longer hair off the animal means that when you wind it into a single strand, you have less bits poking out. It's smoother, which means things like it doesn't pill as much. When you wear a sweater, and all wool will pill to an extent. And, you get those little balls that form under the arms or wherever there's friction, and that sort of felts into these little balls. We call that pilling. You get more pilling on a sweater that's got lots of short hairs that poke out everywhere, because they pull loose. So a longer staple yarn or wool will not have that problem. And so, yeah, I don't think you would find all. Maybe there are. I'm sure there are people. I know there's a whole book of knitting patterns called No Sheep for You, which is all of patterns knitted using non-animal fibers. So using cotton and linen and things like that. And look, my husband finds wool itchy. You know, he would never wear a sweater without wearing something underneath, but I have knitted him several sweaters that he actually likes and wears. The one wool I particularly like, by the way, Filatura di Croce Zara. And there's various sort of knockoff versions of it. You know, I think back in Sydney, Morris and Sons, the Morris Empire, I think, is pretty much a knockoff Zara. It's a merino wool, but it's spun in this very soft, smooth way, such that, you know, I really like it. And I've knitted a few things, like my Road to Golden that I wore on here a few weeks ago, a few episodes ago, was knitted out of Zara, and I just love Zara. That might be the wrong end to pull from self. Let's see if there's another end obvious here anywhere. Where's my end on this? Because I've got an end, but I think that's actually the start. Because when I'm pulling from it, it's wanting to tangle. So you get that sometimes. If you get a skein and you start from the wrong end, it will end up in a world of pain. We'll just go with it because I can't find the other end. Yeah, vegan as well. I mean, but again, you know, they don't. Yes, there are certain practices in sheep in producing wool that people object to, like crutching and things like that. But wool in and of itself is, you know, there's no reason that wool is not vegan. It is an animal product, yes, but you do not have to kill the animal to get it. So I would vegans object to that? I mean, they object to using anything, any animal products, regardless of how it's. I guess so. You know, I suppose if you don't drink milk, milk is, you know, kill the cow to get milk. All right. So yeah, maybe vegan is also a consideration there for knitting with non-animal products. And so what I'm going to do is kind of twist it, because what I'm doing is where I'm pulling it, it's kind of coming from the underside. I'm just going to rotate the skein a little bit. There we go. Now it's going to come off. Yeah, now it's coming off a lot easier. So if you find it doesn't come off the skein easy, you might need to actually sort of twist the skein on the Swift. All right. I'm going to make a knitter out of you yet, Margaret. You're watching all these streams. You'll end up knitting. Watch this. But interestingly, the intersection with your interest, Margaret, Lego, there are people who have made ball winders out of Lego, including electric ones. Like there's ones you can actually just flip the switch and it will wind the ball. I would find that difficult because, you know, it catches. And so being able to adjust the tension as I go is kind of important, but you can buy electric ones. Margaret says, I follow a shepherd who raises heritage sheep and they periodically get into arguments with vegans. Yeah. Because there's no reason why it has to, you know, you could raise it in a very ethical way. And I actually love buying wool and alpaca from small producers. Like I knitted a scarf right out of some alpaca I got, again, in Ralston at the wool shop there. But it's from a local, you know, farmer in New South Wales. And when you buy a skein of it, he writes the name of the alpaca on the skein. You know, instead of a color, you got the name of the animal that it comes from, which is just really cool, you know. And if you're talking about like a connection to the actual natural materials, you really can't get much nicer than that. All right, there's the navy sort of one wound. Nice, lovely little cake. Okay, I'm going to have to grab a few more skeins off the drying rack. One sec. So yeah, here you can see a couple of them. There's a camera there. as they come off the drying rack. Let's do the itty bitty one. I don't know why. Oh, it's because this one we didn't wind on the skein winder. We actually wound it around a niddy noddy. So a niddy noddy, you may have heard the term before, is a niddy noddy is it's a stick with two ends on it at perpendicular ends, and you use it to wind. You know, if you don't have a skein winder, that's the other thing you do. You can wind it round and round a niddy noddy, and the idea is it's used a lot by people who spin their own wool. They'll actually, instead of a skein winder, will use a niddy noddy. And if you know how long the stick is on the niddy noddy, and you count how many wraps there are around it, you can actually estimate how long the ball of wool is, which is very helpful when you're doing your own like that. Let's do something interesting here. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to see, because this ball, I didn't use very much of this color, and the ball has quite a wide opening. I'm going to see if I can actually get the ball onto the ball winder and wind. Yes! And so I'm just going to wind straight onto this existing ball rather than rewind that whole thing, since I didn't use very much. All right, I'm going to have to really shrink this down enough to get this itty bitty skein on it. Yay. Baby skein. Oh, wheel spins. Did I know that? I can't remember if I knew that or not. Yeah, spinning, I don't know. I appreciate people who spin. It's not something I particularly have ever felt a drive to get into. Thinking a lot about weaving lately. And a couple weavers I know who are always posting interesting photos of their, warps and stuff, and making me want to get into weaving. But I have lots of spinning friends too, lots of spinning friends. And, spinning's an area with, if you like specialized tools and equipment, plenty of that in the world of spinning. I know back in Australia and New Zealand, Ashford are well known for their wheels, spinning wheels. Is that the actual end, or is that just a loop? That is just a loop, damn it. Let's put that back around. Where's the end? How can I not find the end on this? There it is. And it's coming off the wrong side, but I don't care. Loom and wheel are both Ashford, yeah. Yeah, Ashford are good looms. Or good, good wheels. Oh, they make, yeah, the Shopping Roads. Oh, he's got a loom too. Yeah, weaving is interesting. You can get a drop spindle. You can get a proper, I think people think you have to have a spinning wheel. You don't have to have a spinning wheel. All right, so let's see if I can just wind onto this existing ball. Let's see what that looks like. Hang on. It's not going well. I need to sort of squeeze it into a bit more of a cake shape, I think, because it's actually just winding around the base of the thing. So it's sort of try and make it a bit more of a cakey sort of a shape than a flat ball. And try this again. What have I done here? How have I managed to do that? Try this again. So I'm gonna go that way. Just going nice and slow to make sure I'm winding around the ball and not just spinning around and around underneath it, which is what was happening before. And now I do have a tangle here because, no. Why is this little bitty skein going to give me the most grief, isn't it? It really is. I need to find that other end. Yeah, I'm going to just pull off a bit and then wind a bit, because that's the problem is if I put any tension on it at all, it's slipping where it winds onto the ball. So I'm just going to do it nice and slow, a bit at a time. Yeah, the Spinners and Weavers Guild in New South Wales is really good. I've given a talk at that group about my knitting and programming talk. I've not, and so I've only been there once, but they're very nice, very cool. That's one of the reasons I got inspired about weaving, because some of the things people in that meeting were showing off were just absolutely gorgeous. So yeah, if you're into spinning and weaving and you're back in Australia, definitely suggest checking out the Spinners and Weavers Guild. I don't know if any of the guilds are back to doing in-person meetings. I know the Knitters Guild I was a member of, we're still doing online meetings. But the Spinners and Weavers Guild, I think, had a really good website too. So if you're just tuning in, I am winding some balls, but this one here I'm doing is a bit non-standard because I'm winding it onto, it's a very small skein, and I'm actually trying to wind it onto the remaining ball of the wool. And yeah, see if I put it under any tension whatsoever, it doesn't want to wind properly. So I'm just going to pull off a bit at a time and then wind a bit at a time. Nice, and I need to kind of do it at a very even tension on this. So this is all wool that I've reclaimed from a sweater that I started knitting 7 years ago. And, we talked about the fact how I knitted the entire body, fronts, and back, like of a Fair Isle sweater. It must have taken me, I must have had well more than 40 hours of work put into that sweater at that point. How I knitted the whole thing without noticing that it was about 8 inches smaller than it needed to be to go around me. I'm never good at estimating volumes. So, and of course, you're going to say, Kris, why didn't you do a gauge swatch? Because that's what good knitters know to do before they start a project like that, is to actually measure their tension. I can't remember if I did. I mean, look, I tend not to. If it's, I know that I'm a tight knitter. I know that I usually just go up a needle size or two, which I had done on the pattern. I was using a larger needle size than the pattern called for. But when I actually measured it the other day, the pattern was expecting 25 stitches over 4 inches, and I was getting 31, which is a rather big difference over the body, back, fronts, and back and fronts of a cardigan. So yeah, the end result was, when I measured it, it was supposed to be 61 centimeters across, and it was 51 centimeters across. And I literally did a double take and measured it again, and nope. The actual diameter of the thing was 4 inches off on both the front and the back, so 8 inches overall. So yeah, it was never gonna fit me. And so what are your options? Your options are to finish knitting it and give it to someone much smaller than you are. What's the point of that? I fell in love with this pattern because I wanted to wear it, and these colors. You knit it and tell yourself that you'll drop 20 kilos. Too old for that. So I frogged it, which means to unravel the damn thing. I unraveled it. I skeined it up. I washed the skeins to relax them and get most of the dust out. And now I am rewinding it into balls. And I think the plan, because the other issue is I don't think I have enough to do a full sleeved cardigan. I think I would need to buy more, and some of these colors are discontinued, and that might be difficult. So I'm thinking I will actually knit a sleeveless vest and just use the same wool and the same charts, but make it a sleeveless vest from the get-go. Okay, so there is that ball of, I think that one's called Ginger. And again, it is a center pull, so we'll go center pull when we knit from that, I think. All right. That's hopefully going to be the most difficult one that I have to deal with. Where's the mint green? Mint green. Mint green. Sorry if you're picking up noise from the street. Our street is normally pretty quiet, but I did leave the window open, and I'm hoping that will help with any dust coming off the wool that's going to trigger my allergies. I do see a lot of like sort of wispy bits of fiber coming off the ball as I wind it, but try and keep my face away from it maybe so I'm not breathing it in. So I'm winding the unused ball first. And then I will tie on the reclaimed wool and wind that on. But yeah, I need to find a pattern to actually use as the basis for the vest. So I'll find a similar 8-ply sleeveless, I want to find a woman's pattern because I do need to sort of have a bit of shaping in it. And then I will just use the chart from the Orkney with these colors. And I'll probably do corrugated ribbing around the waist and the neckline and the sleeves, which was like in the original cardigan. But I should have enough to do a vest and hell, maybe a matching hat. I'm sure I'll have plenty of the wool left over, to be honest with you. Now it's just spinning off my hand, actually. Okay, so there's the ball of green. And now I'll get the skein. All right. Okay, there's the loose ends right there. That's handy. It's always the hardest part of winding from skein is finding the end and getting it to come off smoothly. A lot of it depends on how the person has wound the skein. If you're buying a skein. Me, I wound these skeins, so I got no one to blame but myself if it doesn't come off nicely. That is an end. I think that's actually the beginning, though. Damn it. And that's coming off the wrong direction anyway, so let's go back around the other way. Let's try and not end in a whole horrible nightmare tangle here, please. Okay, flip it around that way. Yes. No. It's coming off flip it around that way. See, spatial. I have problems with spatial. Okay, let's finish untying. So this Swift and Ball Winder, by the way, these cheapy ones, I mean, look, they're available from, I think most yarn shops offer this. I think Amazon, I saw Amazon.com's got these ones as well. But But yeah, you can get a Swift and a ball winder, or as I mentioned, a nitty knotty. You can make your own. And so what I was actually using yesterday when we did the nitty knotty is I actually have a PVC pipe quilting frame, and I was actually using that as a nitty knotty yesterday. So anything that you can sort of, or a chair back, you know, in the olden days you would do where you'd wind it round and round and round like that to make a skein. That can work too, or a very patient friend who holds their hands out like that. There's also a device you can buy for winding center pole balls called a nostipinner, which is basically a long sort of stick that you wind around to wind a center pole ball. I mean, I use, when I'm winding by hand, which isn't often, usually I use a ball winder, but if I'm out somewhere and I have to wind a ball from hand, I'll do the method. There's a method where you sort of use your thumb. You kind of put hold the tail in your hand, and then start winding the ball around your thumb, which means you can get the center pole ball out that way. They always end up a bit tighter and not as nice as a cake from a ball winder like this. Okay, now I just need to rotate this. Okay, we should be good to go now. Yay, there we go. And why are you catching? Don't know why. Oh, it's a loop of itself. Okay, there we go. All right. Yeah, a nostipinner is a good gift as well for a knitter because you can use that to wind nice center pole balls. I mean, the other thing I've used to wind a center pole ball, which is actually works better than your thumb, is a roll from a roll of toilet paper, like the actual cardboard tube, because it is about the same diameter and size as this here, the spindle on the thing. And yeah, you just either cut a little notch in it to put your tail in, as this has, or you could use, I don't know, a bit of sticky tape or something to hold the tail. And yeah, then wind around and around the toilet paper roll, because it's going to give you, when you then crush it to remove it, your cake will collapse a bit and it'll release the tension on the wool. So yeah, you can use a toilet paper roll. Oh, I see what you mean with the with the autofocus. Yeah, it's trying to focus, but then it spins too much. So poor camera. I figured that was going to be difficult. Okay, there is the mint green done. And again, I just kind of tuck the tail down inside the body to hold it. Mint green. We're now halfway point. We've done 6. Cool. Dark green. I haven't sneezed yet, knock on wood. Have not sneezed yet, so maybe I'll be okay. Maybe I'll be okay. All right, so I'm going to start by winding from the unused ball. And I've got it I'm using the box that the wool winder sits in normally, and I've put the ball of wool in it so it can kind of spin around as it comes off the ball without running all over my desk. That can be handy, except sometimes it catches on itself and it pulls up to the top. What's your problem? What's your problem, wool? See, this is why I'm rewinding it, to get rid of these issues that I created when I wound the reclaimed wool onto the ball. And and took the inside and the outside, and yeah. Because there's a center pull strand and an outside strand, and I've clearly gotten them tangled up at some point winding the ball. So when you wind a nice cake, you can just knit from it and not have to worry about this nonsense. Hey, there's an end there. That's the cause of this tangle. There we go, there we go, there we go. Let's pull that end. And let's take that end and wind it up and tuck it down inside, because that's the problem. Okay. There we go. So you can, I was saying last stream, this is a method if you know, people have done who want to knit, either can't afford or don't want to pay for new wool. Wool can be very expensive. I don't think that necessarily non-knitters realize, the cost of wool to knit a jumper alone. If you're using that nice merino or something, you can pay easily $100 Australian, easily, if not more, depending on what it is. I mean, yeah, it's because most people see like a ball of acrylic yarn at Kmart for $1 and think that that's what you use. You don't. Yes, you can knit things out of that. It's not going to be very nice to wear. It's basically plastic. It's going to be hot. It's not breathable. It's not going to keep you actually warm. It will keep you warm. It'll keep you sweaty. Wool has a lot of unique characteristics about it. Like it's water repellent. It will definitely keep you warm because it traps air in it. You can actually iron wool. Like heat will not destroy it the way that it will an acrylic. Like if you actually put an acrylic jumper in the dryer or iron it, it will go limp and floppy like melted plastic. Yeah, I find acrylic I don't like wearing acrylic. I'd much rather wear an animal fiber. And yeah, it can be pricey. So one way of getting around that is to recycle. Is to recycle wool from a jumper that you buy secondhand, either an old jumper of your own or one that you buy in a secondhand shop. You can easily reclaim the wool. And there's some great blog posts I found. People have written up the process that I went through yesterday. But of how do you spot a jumper that you can actually unravel? Because there's no point buying a machine knitted garment in a secondhand store and trying to unravel that, because you will find very quickly that at the seams it is sewn together and you can't unravel in a continuous thread. Instead, you will get hundreds and hundreds of 1 foot long pieces of wool, basically. So you need to be able to spot a jumper that you can actually unravel in as few pieces of yarn as possible. And you're basically looking at the seams there. And so if you read some of these blog posts, they'll tell you what to look out for in terms of the seams. And then there's the process by which you go about it, how you unpick it. And you want to sort of basically start with the order of construction. You want to start with the bit that was cast off. We talked about this, that for frogging, you cannot frog from a cast-on edge. It has to be from a cast-off edge. So if it's on a top-down jumper, like this one that I've knitted, you would start, like this one I'm wearing, the eyelet yoke. If I were going to unpick this jumper, I would need to start at the waistband, because that was the last bit that I knitted, and then unravel that, and then you can frog it from there. In a traditional sewn and pieced garment, First of all, you have to undo the seams. So undo the pieces, undo the seams, and then you can unravel each piece from the cast-off edge. So, if it's a traditional bottom up, that would mean you start from the neck edge and unravel from there. So a certain amount of sort of, analysis and detective work you have to do. But, if you want to knit with like cashmere or something, why not buy a finished garment, in an op shop and unravel it and reclaim the wool? It's going to be a hell of a lot cheaper than buying the wool in balls. I mean, cashmere or Angora, you can be looking at $20 or $30 a ball. So it's a much more cost-effective way of getting yarn to knit with. But you do have to, listen, there's a bit of work involved to prepare it. You've got to, undo the garment, get all the wool off it, and then basically do the process I did here of unraveling it, skeins it up, washing the skeins so that it will relax the kinks. And, depending on how old the garment is, you might want to get out the dust. That's the end there, isn't it? Is that a tail? Where's the tail? All right, let's put it on and undo it and see if we can find the tail. So I'm using an umbrella swift because you can move it up and down like an umbrella. There are other types of swift. There are, but most of them have that sort of umbrella style action. And that's an end and it's going the wrong way. So let me just flip it right now. Flip it that way. I mean, the wooden ones are prettier. It looks a little fancier, the wooden ones. Probably last a little longer. I mean, I'm sure this plastic one, the gears inside are probably plastic as well. Some of the wooden ones I've seen are basically belt drive. They have a belt that spins the ball winder part around. And it's that sort of alternating action that you get, which is really the key for winding a ball evenly, because it means the wool is sort of distributed up and down as opposed to just around and around in the same spot. Okay. Wow, I really tied the heck out of this one. Okay. Tail. Okay, I'm going to tie the tail on. There's a few knots in here now. It's actually funny, when you buy commercially prepared wool, you may find knots as well. And they're actually standards. Each brand will have a certain number of knots that are acceptable per ball. I just remember the knitting shop, it was always, it wasn't funny for them, but it was funny for me when someone would come in complaining that their ball of wool had a knot in it. And I'm like, yes, you get that. That'll happen. And unfortunately, a lot of times there's, I think if you have a ball that's got like above a certain number, you might be able to get the wool manufacturer to refund for you. But normally there's a certain amount that they find acceptable, and you just kind of have to suck that up. It's only, look, it'll happen. It's only really frustrating and a problem if it's a wool like Noro, or something with a long color gradient like this one I'm wearing. If it has a long color gradient, and there's a break and they knot it, hopefully they've joined it back on to the same color that was already on. The problem is when you get a wool like Noro, which has these long, beautiful color changes in it, and it breaks and they knot on to a completely different color. Because then it's like, if you're trying to make two things that match, for example, that completely destroys it. Or you might just get a really abrupt color change instead of a gradual color change. So often in that, what I've seen people do in that case is you actually then have to like unwind until you get back to the point that it should have been joined to. And so you'll have to make your own break until you get to that point and then join it in again. So yeah, it's a real pain, but you can get knots in a ball of commercially prepared wool. It does happen. Okay. There's the dark green. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 we've done. All right. ready orange, the Merida color, the Merida wool. We'll do that next. Let's just make sure it's going to come off nicely before I actually start. No, because that's the center, and the center is a pain in the ass. Let me line that up and tuck it in. And start from the outside. Ah, what is that? That is a tiny little bit. I will join that on. Okay, there's an end in here somewhere. Okay. Yeah, I was trying to decide the best layout for the camera so that you could actually see what I'm doing with this. I hope this is working all right. Okay, I'm winding from the ball now, the unused ball. The fun part with the frogging of the jumper, it took me a good 2 or 3 sessions to actually pull the old sweater apart. And I had a late night work meeting last week, and these work video conferences are great because you can knit or depending on how involved you have to be, you might be able to knit or do other things. So I did a training session, which was basically just watching a video. And so I was able to frog while I watched and listened to the video, but I said it triggered a really bad allergy attack. So all of a sudden I started sneezing like mad. Luckily, I'm guessing it feels like I've gotten most of the dust off because I don't seem to be having that problem today, which is very good. I did also take a Zyrtec today and I've got the window open. Even though it is minus 6 degrees Celsius here today, it is very cold. And I can feel a little bit of a breeze coming in the window. Germans are obsessed with fresh air. They open the window all the time, even in very cold weather. But that might be helping with the allergy issue as well. I think when I was frogging it, it's just that I was like leaning over it and breathing it in, and it was going into my eyes. Honestly, debated yesterday. I wore my COVID mask while I did the skating, but I also was like tempted to wear ski goggles because I wanted to keep it from getting into my eyes as well. Okay. All right, now I will tie on this tiny little bit of excess. I don't know what that was about self, but join that on. And the pattern actually had me buy 13 balls of wool. However, one of the colors was not used on the body. So I actually do have one color that is still unused in the ball entirely, which must have been used on the sleeves. So clearly, since I'm going to knit a sleeveless thing, I'm not going to be using that color. So I will have an extra, I'm going to have plenty of this wool left over. Maybe I can make some mittens or hats or something. Okay, I'll just break the little ties that I put on it. So again, I didn't just, if one thing people do is you skein it up if you're going to dye it. So you could over dye it as well. Let's say you reclaim a jumper from, from Goodwill or the Up Shop that you don't like the color. You can actually dye it. You can buy, dye from a craft store and you can over dye it. If you do that, you want to be sure when you skein it up like this that you tie it really loosely because you want the dye obviously to be able to penetrate. You're not doing tie dye. You don't want there to be marks where you've tied it in the skein. So you would want to make sure you're tying your skeins really loosely. I was more worried about it tangling up in the bath and everything. So I didn't tie it tight, but I tied it in several locations. Okay. All right, so that's tied on. Let's continue on now with the Swift. So apologies for the autofocus going crazy. It doesn't know how to handle the Swift. And yeah, this red was used in sort of smaller chunks throughout the design. So you might see a lot of knots going by where it was joined in. So there's one. Go back a little bit. So there's one there. There's a knot where we've joined it in. But I will just deal with that when I knit it when I come to it. I will join it in there into some new ball. Unfortunately, with a Fair Isle jumper, like if you're going to reclaim one from the op shop, don't reclaim a Fair Isle one because you'll end up with short pieces of wool. If you're going to reclaim wool from a secondhand sweater, pick one that's all one color, one or two colors, because then you're likely to get longer pieces. You do not want to deal with a lot of very short pieces of wool. I have a few short pieces, but this was pricey wool, so really I'm still going to get the most value out of it that I possibly can. What I should have done was knit a gauge swatch and figure out earlier that the sweater that I was knitting was too small. Okay, tuck that tail down in, and there's the red done. So we've now done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Only 4 more to go. Let me go grab them. I'm actually only going to do the last 3 because the last one, this skein here, this sort of camel, I think it's called camel actually. It was the biggest one. It was the one I'd used the most of, and it actually still feels damp. So what I might actually do is just sort of try and spread it out a little more and leave it longer to dry because I do not want to wind it up while it's damp. So I'm just going to kind of try and spread it out a little bit and leave it hanging to dry. So that one I will save till last. Let's do the others first. The purple. The purple's a fairly big one because there's only a tiny bit left on the original ball. So I will start doing that one from the ball and it immediately tangles itself up in a twisty knot. And you just make sure when you start cranking, you're cranking in the right direction. If you start going backwards, that will you're going to end up with quite a big snarl on your ball winder. As I said, ball winders come in different sizes, so you do want to make sure if you are going to buy one. I mean, the size I've got is the most common, and that will do up to 100 gram, I think, skein. I think if you are going to do any bigger than that, 100-gram ball, like which normally would be in the realm of spinners and weavers. I think I've occasionally seen 200-gram hanks. If you were going to do that, then you really want one of the heavy-duty, larger size ones. But this size is the sort of general purpose one for skeins that you buy from, an indie dyer or, that way, or a hand spinner. Bye, Margaret. Thanks for joining in. Always fun. Always glad to see a friendly name in the chat. Stay safe. So I think there's a couple other people on. If you are on, I generally stream on Sunday mornings Germany time, which is where I am. I might adjust the time because, let's face it, I never actually make it at the time that I specify because I end up sleeping in, or, this morning was just doom scrolling on the internet. So I might just bump it back an hour or two because realistically that's the time I actually start. All right, so there was the little bit of wool ball. And so now I'll get the skein. So this is the skein that I reclaimed from the jumper that I pulled apart. And I say jumper, by the way. Jumper is Australian. Americans would say a sweater. Australians don't say sweater. They say jumper, which is an American I always thought of as being like a little girl's pinafore, a sort of dress style garment that you wear over the top of something else. But in Australia, they don't say sweater, they say jumper. And I lived there for 20 years, and so that is why I call it a jumper. So I reclaimed this wool from a jumper that I was knitting that was too small, and so I wound it into skeins and then gave it a bath and let it dry to sort of relax the kinkiness out of the wool. And now I am rewinding it into lovely yarn cakes. So that's what we call this sort of style of ball. And so then I'll be able to knit from it and start a new project. And not have it be a bag of just denial and sadness sitting in the corner of the craft room as it's been for 7 years. So I'm just joining this on with a knot. I'm just doing a little square knot. And I won't knit the knots into the garment. I will address them when I'm knitting and I come to them. But there are going to be a few knots you'll see, just because it was a Fair Isle and all over sort of patterned garment with lots of colors, which means that there were a lot of breaks and a lot of knots. So this, what you see spinning, so I've got a ball winder in front of me. That's this part. That's what's actually winding the ball. And the thing that is spinning is called an umbrella swift. If you've never seen one before, it's called an umbrella. A swift is this used for winding balls and used in spinning. That's this thing. It's an umbrella swift because, as you can see, don't collapse, don't collapse. That was a mistake. Just trying to demonstrate to you. An umbrella swift because it goes up and down with an umbrella style action. And the idea is you can make it smaller to put the skein on and then make it bigger to hold it out, and it will stay in the middle. And so you use these in combination, which allows you on your own to wind a really nice ball without needing someone, like in the olden days, to stand there for hours with their hands out like this with the wool around it, or the back of a chair or something like that. And so the swift spins freely, and it's probably making the autofocus go a bit crazy as I crank the ball winder. And you can see I'm actually using my other hand to try and even out the tension a little bit as it goes onto the ball winder. Because sometimes as it comes off the skein as you're spinning, it will catch on itself, or it'll kind of be tucked under some other wool, and so it won't come off entirely smoothly. And so by using my hand, I can kind of try and even that out a little bit, or stop really quickly if I need to. Yeah. But this is a much faster way of winding a ball than doing it by hand. If you buy wool in hanks or in skeins, or you plan on dyeing, or you plan on reclaiming wool, or you plan on spinning, you're going to want to invest in a Swift and a ball winder. And it's fun. And it looks cool. And I was saying, every time I've been at like a demonstration where we've used these, people just find it fascinating, despite the fact that this technology is very, very, very old. You know, you buy wooden ones of these, which are a little bit nicer, but the ones I've got get the job done. Had to do a few repairs on the Swift. They're pretty cheaply manufactured. But the nice thing, when I did the scanning yesterday, when all the wool I'd pulled apart the jumper, unraveled, I then wanted to wind it into these skeins. My Swift, I'm able to actually, you can see at the bottom of it, it actually turns 90 degrees. I can adjust it so that it's horizontal, which is why it has a little handle on top. So you can actually wind it to wind a skein. And I can show you a photo of that here in a minute once I finish this ball. Nearly at the end. Just trying to crank at a nice even pace. Here we go, right at the end. There it is. Okay, slide that off. And so the point of this ball winder is this very thick spindle, which actually, by the way, comes off for packing it up. But the point of that very thick spindle is that when you pull the yarn off, it immediately collapses. You know, you can squeeze it, the cake, that's what we call that, and it collapses, and you don't end up with a big hole in the middle. And that means that it immediately releases the tension on the yarn. So it isn't stretched tight. You do not want to wind it so that it's really pulled tight and destroys all the lovely elasticity in your ball of wool. All right, so there's the purple done. Yeah, I was going to show you, excuse me. Oh, that's getting a lot of fuzz off the wool there, getting in my throat. I'm going to show you what it looked like using the Swift as a skein winder. So this was yesterday. And so when I mounted the Swift horizontally, so that's what it looks like. And so it's actually able to, start it by winding it around. And then I sort of twisted it on itself to secure it. And then I was able to turn that hand crank and then start winding the skein together. And I actually had my partner helping out as well. He was helping pull it off the ball and doing any joins that needed to be done so that it came off in one continuous strand and I could skein it up. So it went very quickly. But yeah, a horizontal, being able to have a Swift that converts into a skein winder is very handy. And to do that, you need one that you can basically turn and go horizontal like this. This is the first time I'd ever used mine in that way. Once I had it in skeins, I tied it in several places. So this shows you here. So it came off you can see it's very crinkly. And I hope you can tell as I'm winding it, the crinkles have sort of relaxed, because the way that it relaxed is I put it, that's all of it, I put it in the bath. I gave it a bath with lukewarm water and a little bit of wool wash last night and let it sit in there for a good hour, which just relaxed it. It's almost like when you take your hair out, like if you braid wet hair and then you take the braids out, it ends up like crinkly. That's how the wool was. And so by washing it, I let it relax, and then it's been hanging up to dry on a drying rack, these skeins that I did. And so now I'm rewinding that. All right, so I've only got 2 left that I'm going to do today. So let's do this sort of teal kind of a color here. And which end do I want to? I don't want to pull that end. So I'm starting by winding the unused ball first. I want to get just a single cake. That's my goal. And so I have each of these colors. I had a small unused ball left. And so I'm starting by winding that. And so what you do is the ball winder itself has a sort of groove cut in the top. So I'm going to wind through my little thread holder and then into the little groove to secure this. The idea of these balls, these cakes, is you can knit from the center of them and then they don't roll around, which is always nice. If you are knitting from a ball, always try and pull out the center thread because it's much easier than having it roll around on you. And so now I can actually start cranking. And so I've got a box that I've chucked the ball of wool into, so as it's coming off and it's spinning around, it's not rolling all over the floor. It's staying in this little box on my desk. And just using my hand, put a little to even out the tension on it, because I want, as I said, you don't want to pull your ball that you're winding to, I'm not winding it really tightly. I don't want to destroy all the lovely bounce and elasticity in the wool. So I'm kind of trying to just keep a nice even tension on it. If I slow it down, you can see the action of the ball winder. Because of the way that it winds, the wool ends up going up and down as it goes around, which means you get this really nice even sort of cake rather than a ball. If you've ever wound a ball of wool, you know how difficult it is, because you sort of wind to one direction for a while and then you stop, you wind another direction for a while. And it's really difficult as a human winding a ball to wind a ball that is completely even the way that a machine does it. And this wool is sticky. It does sort of stick to itself. So that's why sometimes it pulls a bit of a loop. And it's not a knot. It's just where it's kind of catches on itself. This last little bit, I'll just do a bit at a time. Don't need the box anymore. So if you haven't watched before, I do have previous streams. I spent the last month or two working on a sweater called Lanatus that I just finished, which you can see on my Instagram, or I'll put it up on my blog today. And so I finished a project, and so this is the start of a new one. And I started by undoing an old one that wasn't working. New Year's resolution was to deal with the works in progress pile, and this is the longest standing one of them. And so if you want to see the old streams, they're on Twitch for 2 weeks, and then they get archived to my YouTube page, which I will put in the comments, by the way, just so you can, I'll find that and share it in the comments. There it is. Actually, I do have, I always forget, I've got a custom URL. Let me find my custom URL on YouTube. Share it. Where is it? Where is it? Customization. I don't use YouTube enough to know where this stuff is. There we go, custom URL. That makes sense. It's just my name. So there's the YouTube URL where the old streams are available if you want to see them. All right, so now I'm taking this the skein that I wound and washed yesterday, and I'm going to put it on the umbrella swift. I'm just trying to see if I can find where the tail is so that I can more easily get it started. I think that's the tail there, actually. All right, so I'm going to collapse the umbrella swift a little bit so that I can get the skein on. Yep, and then I will expand it to sort of hold it. I'm not making it like super tight or anything, just to sort of hold it in the right position. Now undo the ties that I used to hold the skein to keep it from getting all in a giant tangle when I washed it. And this is just, I used some scrap wool left over from Lanatus actually, because it's nice and thin and easy to break. And I only had a small amount left over. Okay, and then I will take my thread here, and I'm just tying it. I'm tying it on to the old one. Normally in knitting we avoid knots, but in this case I want to wind it as a ball, and so I'm tying a knot. When I go to actually use this, when I knit from these balls, I will undo the knots as I go, and so that there won't be knots in my finished garment. But for now I'm making knots as I wind, and now I can start winding off the swift. And so the swift rotates freely, just through the action of it being pulled by the ball winder. And if you do it right, it will spin freely. The problem, and I've had this problem with some skeins, especially if you buy skeins, someone else has dyed or spun for you. Depending on how they've wound the skein, and if you get the wrong end of it, if you get the starting end rather than the finishing end, it can be an absolute nightmare where it won't spin freely and come off nicely like this. But I did this skein yesterday, and so I have mostly had good luck with my skeins. It seems like I didn't screw it up, and they didn't get tangled up when I washed it, and so it's coming off quite nicely. Also working nicely is my new laptop, because we've not had any break in the stream so far that I can see, and CPU usage has consistently been like under 12%. So new machine doing much better at streaming than the old machine. This bodes well for the future. And yeah, I know the autofocus is having some difficulty with the spinning swift. Sorry about that. Oh, I should go out and go for a walk. It's beautiful today, even though it's disgustingly cold. If you're not a follower, feel free to hit the follow button. I usually stream on this day around this time, but then you'll get a notification when I do. Or you can follow on YouTube, and that's where all the streams end up archived over there anyway. Okay. So, all right, center pull, cake of yarn. And I'm just gonna take that tail that was the last bit and sort of tuck it in. And only one more to go, which is the gray color. That's this one here. Maybe I'll try it in my little bowl. I've got one of these bowls, which has a funny opening, and you're meant to put your knitting wool in it with the idea that it will feed through the little hole, and then the ball can spin freely. But I've found so far that the ball doesn't so much spin freely. It kind of just sits there or catches. It's a nice idea. It doesn't seem to work super well, but we'll see. So I'm winding off the unused wool first, the small ball of unused wool, and then I will wind on the skein. Yeah, see the ball just pops out of that bowl, so I don't know that the bowl is doing much. It's very pretty. I keep things in it, and as far as, using it to keep a ball from rolling around, it doesn't work great. I am getting some fluff coming off this. Oh, that's interesting. I do seem to be using more power than it's drawing on the... Oh, it's because I'm charging in the wrong... I think I've got the charging cable plugged into the side that doesn't charge as fast. Just noticed my battery's going down despite the fact that my laptop is plugged in, but I'm guessing that's probably why. So I'll try plugging into one of the other USB-C outlets and see if it charges. Yeah, it's plugged in. It should be at 100%. Shouldn't be drawing battery power at all. All right, getting to the end here. This little ball wants to catch on itself, so that's why it's just a bit sticky. Okay, that's pretty much the end of the ball. Yep, there's the end. So now I will get the hank, which is our last remaining skein. Well, there's one other one, but it said it's not quite dry yet, so I want it to dry fully before I wind it. So this is the gray, and let's just see before I put it on if I can find the tail, because that will help me make sure I'm putting it on the right direction. There's a tail. Yes. Yes. Okay. So collapse the Swift so I can get it on. Okay, and then I can make it a bit bigger. Cool. Now I undo the ties. Actually, maybe what I'll do to help the other one dry is I'll put it on the Swift, undo the ties, and sort of open it up and fan it out a bit. That'll help it, because right now it's a very big. I should have probably wound it into 2 skeins, because I did it in one big one, and it's so thick that I don't think the air is getting completely to it for it to dry, and I don't want it to stay damp for too long. So I'll try and spread it out on the Swift and see if it dries a bit faster that way. Okay, there's all the ties done. So now I can join on this tail. Tie my knot. This Rowan felted tweed is very fuzzy. It is very fuzzy. There's a lot of fluff that's coming off it. Like my desk is covered in just little fiber fluff. Okay, now we can start winding. And this is the last, this is the last one I'll do, which is 2 hours. So it will take more than 2 hours to wind all 12 of these balls. So there's a metric for you if you want to know how long it'll take you to wind skeins. I mean, the fact that I've gone from balls and skeins on each cake, if you were doing just a skein on each cake, it would be, it wouldn't be so, you'd be faster. But still, that's 12 over 120. That's about 10 minutes. That's about 10 minutes for 50 grams. And then look, I'm talking and I'm showing you stuff and stuff. So between 5 and 10 minutes, I would say, per 50 gram skein or hank would be your rule of thumb. I'm gonna need to vacuum in here. Like I can just see so much fluff and fiber coming off this. My desk is coated in it. Okay, that's the last of it. That is the last of it. So I'll slide it off and make sure I've got the tail there and collapse the cake down so it releases the tension in the wool. We don't want to stretch and lose all the beautiful bounce and elasticity of our wool. And I've got that cake. And now I'm just going to get so this is the other one I mentioned, the very thick one, the camel one. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on the Swift. So let's put it on the Swift. All right. Open it up a little bit. And then I'm going to undo it so that I can kind of spread it out and let it dry. I think this will help it to dry because where I've tied it, it's actually just holding it a little too, I want to kind of like be able to fan it out a bit and let the air get to it because I don't want to wind it while it's damp at all. Just undoing where I've tied it. Okay, now I'm just going to kind of see if I can kind of open it up a little bit. Just so that it isn't all bunched up. So I can spread it out. That's definitely better. Heck, I could probably, crank it. Get some airflow going to kind of let it dry a little bit. All right, well, I'll leave that there. I'll leave the window open and let that dry a bit more before I wind that one up. But that's all. We have wound so far today 11 cakes of yarn from this reclaimed sweater in about 2 hours. So it's taken me, nearly a week just to get the sweater undone, deal with the wool, and get set up so that I can actually start a new project. So next week you will see me knitting with this new wool. And so you'll get to see what I'm using it for. So thanks for joining me. I hope you learned something about Swifts and bowl winders and maybe inspired you to invest in those if you don't have some yet. They're really great tools to have. I don't use them all the time, but when you need them, it's great to have the right tool for the job. So my name is Kris, and I hope you've enjoyed the stream, and I hope you'll join me in the future. Thanks a lot.